Hello, my name is Jared Ludlow, Publications Director at the BYU Religious Studies Center, your weekly resource for gospel scholarship. And today we'll talk about some possible resources to accompany your Come Follow Me reading for September 12th through 18th, some various chapters from Isaiah. The first one is called The Prophets and the Mission by Ellis Rasmussen, a former religion professor here at BYU. And it comes from a volume called Isaiah and the Prophets, Inspired Voices from the Old Testament. And Professor Rasmussen starts his article discussing the concept of chosen people, which sometimes people throughout history have taken as meaning they were special and select and turned inward and ignored people beyond them. But the real concept of the chosen people, particularly with the Abrahamic covenant, is to bring salvation to all other people, all other families and other nations. And so he reviews scriptures from various prophets, and he spends a good deal of time on Isaiah and his warnings and exhortations to descendants and heirs of the Abrahamic mission in the last days, to pull out how these various scriptures help us understand what we should be doing to bring the gospel, the covenant, and the plan of salvation to others around us. The second article is called Isaiah and the Restoration of Israel by Terry Ball, a former professor of religion here at BYU. And it comes from a volume called A Witness for the Restoration, Essays in Honor of Robert J. Matthews. And Professor Ball starts off looking at Jesus' teachings to the Nephites about Isaiah's scriptures on the restoration or the gathering of the house of Israel. And then he goes through and answers various questions that he poses, such as, why will Israel's restoration be needed? When will Israel's restoration occur? Who will be involved in Israel's restoration? And how will Israel's restoration occur? What will be the results of Israel's restoration? So by posing these questions and answering them, particularly in light of what Isaiah teaches, he's able to discuss the restoration of Israel. And the final one for this week is called The Contribution of the JST to Understanding the Old Testament Prophets by Mont Nyman, a former religion professor here at BYU. And it comes from the book, The Joseph Smith Translation, The Restoration of Plain and Precious Truth. And in this article, he looks at the various changes made by the Joseph Smith translation to the book of Isaiah and then later to some other books of the Old Testament. But particularly with the book of Isaiah, he notes that there's more than 100 changes that the prophet Joseph Smith made in this one book. Many of these changes can be attributed to the extensive quoting of the book of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon. However, he also notes there are many of the differences between the Book of Mormon text and the King James Version that are not carried over in the JST. And so a few others, there are additional changes in the JST that are not found in the Book of Mormon. So a lot of his article is looking at these differences between the King James Version, the quotations of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, and the JST. And so he particularly looks at significant changes that are different from the Book of Mormon and the King James Version. And after looking at Isaiah, then he'll look at Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and the 12 prophets, or what we often call the minor prophets. And he notes the various changes that are done in these different books, and notes that overall there's really very few changes relative to some other parts of the Old Testament.